The wind in Dry Creek, New Mexico, was not just air moving across land. It was a living thing. A mean, restless creature that scraped across the plains like it wanted to peel the world down to its bones. In the summer of 1878, that wind was the only companion most folks had. It whistled against the warped wooden buildings and carried the taste of dust, heat, and broken hopes. Dry Creek was small. A few weathered buildings huddled together like they were trying to hide from the sun. There was a general store with faded paint, a saloon whose doors swung crooked, a tired church with a pointing steeple, and a blacksmith shop that rang with a slow, heavy rhythm. The sheriff was a man who loved whiskey more than law, and everyone else simply tried to survive the dry season without losing their minds or their land. Out beyond the edge of town, where the dirt grew harder and the land turned stubborn, lived Sarah Mave. Her place wasn't a farm. Not really. It was a fight. 200 acres of dry earth and rock that her parents had once believed could become something green. They were wrong, but it was all she had left of them. Sarah was 26, a widow the town had stopped calling a widow. Now she was simply that Mave woman. She had a silence about her, one the town called bitterness, but it wasn't. It was the result of having no words left to waste. She rose every morning before the sun, checked her failing well, tended her patch of corn, mended fences, and tried to hold her world together with nothing but willpower. She was lonely in a way that lived deep in her bones. But she hid it so well the world believed she felt nothing at all. Everything changed the day Elias Cross rode into town. He came in slow, his dusty buckskin beneath him, moving like it knew the trail better than he did. Elias was tall and worn by the road. His face carried a map of scars, and his eyes were cold blue like winter water. He had the calm, dangerous stillness of a man who had lived too long with violence. He had once been a bounty hunter until a job in Texas went wrong and left him with a knife wound and a tired heart. Now he rode without destination, trying to outrun the ghosts he carried. He got off his horse in front of the saloon, and the men on the porch fell quiet. They saw the scars, the worn gun belt, the stillness. They saw a threat. Elias saw nothing but a dusty town he planned to leave after a drink. Across the street, inside Miller's General Store, Sarah was trading gourds and dried herbs for flour. She ignored the two women whispering near the shelves, Beatrice Hale and Martha Pringle. Everyone knew Beatrice ran Dry Creek as much as her brother Thomas did. "You ought to sell that land," Beatrice said loudly. "A woman alone can't handle a place like that. It's foolish." "My land is not for sale," Sarah said, her voice steady. That only made Martha sniff and mutter about sin and pride. Elias watched the whole thing from the livery stable. He saw how Sarah kept her back straight, how she didn't rise to their bait. He recognized the stiff, quiet courage of someone who refused to break, even when everything around them pushed them to. He watched her leave town with her mule, and without knowing why, he swung back onto his horse and followed. He kept his distance. He wasn't planning to interfere. He just wanted to make sure she made it home. That's what he told himself. Then he saw the buggy blocking her path. Thomas Hale sat in it, his face red from sun and whiskey. Two of his ranch hands sat on horseback beside him. They didn't move aside. "Miss Mave," Hale said in a sweet, wrong voice. "Heard you were in town trying to sell them vegetables of yours. I'm here to offer you more money than that land's worth." "It isn't for sale," she said. Hale's smile cracked. "It's dying land. You'll die with it. Take the offer." "No." His ranch hand suddenly grabbed her mule's bridle. The mule cried out, jerking in panic. Sarah stepped back, fear flashing through her eyes, and Elias moved. He rode up slow at first, so slow it was unnerving. Then he stopped beside Sarah, placing his horse between her and the ranch hand. "Let go of the animal," Elias said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold, sharp, deadly. The ranch hand froze. He looked toward Hale for direction, but even Hale hesitated. A man who wore scars like that wasn't bluffing. "Let go," Elias repeated. The hand dropped the bridle like it was burning. "This ain't over," Hale spat. Then he snapped his reins and rode off, dragging a cloud of red dust behind him. Silence settled over the road. Sarah looked at Elias. He was a stranger, a dangerous one, but in that moment, he had been the only thing standing between her and real harm. "I thank you," she said, stiff and formal. "He'll be back," Elias answered. "I know." She turned away, and he watched her walk the long road back to her small cabin. He told himself he would leave before sunset. But he didn't. He set up camp a half-mile away, telling himself he was just resting. But he knew the truth. Something about her, her quiet strength, her stubborn defiance, had pulled him in when nothing else had in years. And something in him, buried deep beneath scars and guilt, knew he wasn't riding out of Dry Creek just yet. The next afternoon, Dry Creek was quieter than usual, like the heat had pressed its hand over the whole town. Elias Cross rode in for supplies, walking slow and steady toward Miller's general store. His side still ached from old wounds, a reminder of a life that had shaped him harder than any man should be shaped. He planned to be quick. Coffee, ammunition, maybe some jerky. Then he would head back toward open country. Or so he told himself. Inside the store, Sarah had just finished bartering for flour and beans when the whispers began. Beatrice Hale and Martha Pringle stood near the shelves, their eyes locked on her like hawks. "Well now," Beatrice said in a cold voice everyone could hear, "if it isn't Sarah Mave, keeping that strange man out there on her property, a widow living with a drifter. Imagine the shame." Martha tittered behind her hand. "Folks are saying he's dangerous." Sarah kept her gaze down and continued her business. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Words wasted on people like them were words she refused to lose. Outside, Elias tied his horse at the livery and took in the town's mood. People looked at him longer than they should. Whispered when he passed. He ignored it. He'd been called worse things in worse towns. Inside the saloon, 2 of Thomas Hale's men sat at the bar. Jed, the grinning one with mean eyes, and Cletus, big as a wall but slow behind the eyes. When Elias walked in, both went stiff. The bartender paused in the middle of polishing a glass. Elias didn't look their way. He ordered a whiskey, drank it slow, and set the coin on the counter. He made it 3 steps toward the door before Jed stepped in front of him. "You think you're some hero?" Jed hissed. "Talkin' big to Mr. Hale. Maybe we ought to teach you how things work in this town." "I don't want trouble," Elias said evenly. "You got it anyway." Jed swung first. Sloppy, predictable. Elias caught him with a shove that sent him stumbling into a table. Cletus came next. Elias dodged the charge and drove his elbow into the man's ribs, forcing a grunt of pain. The fight was quick. 2 men against 1, but Elias was something different. Calm, experienced, efficient. He knocked Jed flat and had Cletus gasping on the floor. He should have walked away. He didn't see Jed pull the knife. The blade flashed. Elias twisted, but not fast enough. The knife tore deep into his left side. The pain was blinding white. Hot. Wet. Jed froze when Elias's gun cleared leather. "Get out!" Elias growled. They scrambled out the back door like frightened children. Elias holstered his gun, breathing hard, pressed a hand against the wound and felt warm blood soaking his shirt. He walked out into the sunlight, each step heavy. He made it to his horse, managed to mount. The world tilted. He aimed for open land but turned, without thinking, toward Sarah's homestead. He didn't make it. Less than a mile out of town, he fell from the saddle and hit the dirt hard. Sarah was checking her snares when she saw the riderless buckskin, the reins dragging, the horse turning nervously in circles. Fear shot through her like lightning. She ran. Elias lay in the road, pale under the dust, blood pooling under his shirt. He wasn't moving. No one would have blamed her for riding into town for help, for leaving him there, for saying this stranger wasn't her responsibility. But Sarah was not built that way. Some people walk away, some don't. She heaved him up, staggering under his weight. Step by step, she dragged him toward her cabin. his arm over her shoulder, his breath shallow and weak. His horse followed behind, like it understood. Inside the small, dim room, she laid him on her cot. The smell of blood filled the air, sharp and terrifying. She boiled water, ripped one of her last clean sheets into strips. Her hands didn't shake, not once. The wound was deep, angry, ragged, a knife wound, not a gunshot. She cleaned it, stitched it, bandaged it tight. When she finished, sweat soaked her shirt, her hair stuck to her face, and her breath was shaking. He was burning with fever by nightfall. For 3 days he drifted in and out, murmuring names she didn't know. Sarah fed him broth with a shaking spoon, cooled his forehead with water, sat by his cot through the darkest hours. He was a man shaped by violence. But here he was, helpless as a child. On the 4th day he woke. His eyes found hers. Confusion, pain, shame. "You should have left me," he rasped. "I didn't," she said softly. He tried to sit up and failed. She caught him before he fell. "You won't heal if you move," she said. "I bring trouble. It already found me." A silence settled between them, heavy, fragile. In the days that followed, Elias slowly regained his strength. He watched the way she moved around her cabin, quiet, focused, strong. He noticed the way she rationed water, how she whispered to the mule to calm it, how she fought the land with a stubborn will he'd only ever seen in men who refused to die. He saw things she didn't think anyone noticed, the slump of her shoulders after a long day, the loneliness in her eyes at dusk. She saw things too. The careful way he whittled a handle for her bucket, the pain behind his quiet, the guilt he carried like another wound. Something unspoken passed between them, something slow, dangerous, certain. Neither of them had names for it yet, but both felt it. And then one night, the coyotes came, 3 of them, lean and desperate, drawn by drought and hunger. Their snarling surrounded the lianto where her mule was tethered. The mule cried out. Elias staggered to his feet. Sarah grabbed her father's rifle. "Stay inside," she said. He ignored her. They stepped into the moonlight together. Sarah raised the rifle, steady as stone. The shot cracked through the night. One coyote fell. The others ran. When Elias turned, he saw her silhouette in the silver light, the rifle lowered, her breath steady. She was not just surviving. She was fighting. And in that moment, for the first time in years, Elias Cross felt something warm burn through his chest. Respect. Maybe even something deeper. The days after the coyote attack changed something between them. It wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. A man didn't stand beside a woman under the silver moon, both breathing hard with danger still on their skin, and returned to being strangers the next morning. From that night on, they moved like 2 people who shared the same burden, the same breath, the same stretch of land that refused to yield. Elias healed slow, but he healed. As soon as he could walk without the world tilting, he started working again. He patched the roof, fixed the hinge on her door, strengthened the corral fence. He didn't tell her he was doing it because he wanted to repay her. He didn't say he was doing it because without her care he would have bled out in the dirt. He was doing it because he couldn't stand the thought of her fighting this hard land alone. Sarah didn't thank him. She didn't know how. Instead, she left a plate of food for him every evening. Quiet gestures, the only way she knew how to speak when words felt too heavy. But while their homestead grew steadier, the trouble from town didn't fade. The anger of Thomas Hale, that big, cruel grin he wore like armor, only got worse. And Beatrice, with her poisoned tongue, had spread stories that grew like weeds. By the time Sarah went into town for supplies, the whole place had turned its back on her. People stared as she passed, whispered, judged. But she kept her head up, bought what she needed, and left with her spine straight as a fence post. Elias saw the look in her eyes when she returned. A quiet hurt, a deep exhaustion. He didn't press her. He just helped her unload the mule and said, Tell me what happened." She told him everything. His jaw tightened, not just in anger, but in guilt. He had brought danger to her. And in the deep hours of that night, while Sarah slept, he packed his things. He buckled his gun belt, folded his duster, left a few coins on the table, and walked out. He thought leaving would save her, but the door creaked behind him before he reached his horse. "You're a liar," Sarah said. He froze. "You said you were staying, but you're running." "I'm trying to protect you," he said quietly. "By leaving me alone?" she snapped. "By letting them win? By doing the very same thing you've hated yourself for all these years?" His breath caught. She had hit the wound he'd tried to bury. "You left your friend once," she said, her voice trembling with a deep fire. "Are you going to leave me too? What is the difference?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. She stepped closer until she stood in the cold moonlight, her eyes bright and fierce. "I claimed you," she said, "in that store, in front of those women. I claimed you. I fought for you. And if you walk away, then you make me a fool." Elias looked at her then, really looked, at her anger, her fear, her bravery, and something inside him shifted. He took one step back toward her, then another. And then he was standing in front of her, the dust cold under his boots, his chest rising and falling with something that felt like surrender. Not weakness. Home. "I'm staying," he said quietly, and Sarah nodded once, the smallest, strongest nod he had ever seen. What followed were some of the hardest days of their lives. They rebuilt the cabin, the two of them working side by side until their muscles screamed. They dug an irrigation ditch together, repaired tools, repatched the roof, fought the stubborn land like a pair of soldiers fighting the same war. And one evening, after a long day of clearing stones from the field, he returned to the cabin to find Sarah cooking, not just boiling beans, cooking. A rabbit roasted in the hearth, wild potatoes she dug that morning, real food, a meal made with care. For him, she never said a word. Just placed the tin plates on the table and sat quietly. He ate slowly, watching her across the small wooden table, the firelight turning her hair gold and her silence soft instead of lonely. When she stood to clear the plates, he caught her wrist gently. She froze. He rose, turned her toward him, and cupped her cheek with one rough hand. Her breath caught. Her eyes lifted, and then he kissed her. A slow, warm, grateful kiss. When he pulled back, he whispered against her lips, "Every meal is sweeter with you." Her shoulders softened, her breath shook, and she leaned into him with something that felt like trust. At that same moment, a glow flickered outside the window. A sharp, wrong glow. Fire! Elias went still, his eyes narrowed. He moved to the window and cursed under his breath. Hail! The Leonto was engulfed in flames, her mule screamed inside, and 3 riders circled the homestead, Thomas Hale and his 2 men. "Sarah," Elias said, grabbing his gun belt, "stay low." Gunshots cracked through the air. Sarah rushed for her father's rifle. Elias slipped out into the night, moving like a shadow. The fire lit the yard bright orange, throwing violent shapes across the dirt. Jed tried to drag Sarah off the porch. Elias shot him off his horse. But Jed fired back. The bullet hit Elias in the chest and threw him to the ground. Sarah screamed, rushing to him just as Hale raised his rifle for a killing shot. The world slowed. Smoke, fire, heat. Sarah's breath in his ear. Elias fighting to keep his eyes open. Then, gunshots, townfolk, Reverend Blackwood, Old Man Miller, 3 others. Hale fled, his men fled. Shots echoed across the land, but no one followed. No one dared leave Elias bleeding in the dirt. They carried him inside. Sarah held his hand and refused to leave his side as he drifted on a river of fever and pain. For days she fought for him. She fed him, bathed him, begged him to stay. And finally, his eyes opened for real. "You came back," she whispered. "I stayed," he breathed. The town rebuilt the burnt cabin wall. They defended her land. They stood with her now, not out of pity, but respect. And when Elias could walk again, he walked straight to her. He took her hand, and he never let go. On the porch of their rebuilt home, as the sun set over Dry Creek, two people who had once been alone now faced the world together, stronger, softer, and unbreakable.